is Cameron Luxton. He's a farmer, a builder, and ex-local Tauranga candidate for the last election. And he's so humble, he forgot to say who he was. So I will. Good on you, Cam. Thank you. We've got some great people here in Bay of Plenty. We've also got Bruce, the man in the big pink T-shirt at the back there. He was our Bay of Plenty candidate. And two of our MPs who were elected 6 months ago, Saturday, just been. Simon Court is a civil engineer, or he was. Now he's a politician. I don't know what you make of that transition, but Simon is from Te Aratū in West Auckland. And Simon is really taking it to them on the environment, RMA, the Zero Carbon Act, local government, bringing his experience, 30 years as a civil engineer. We're really pleased to have Simon in Parliament. Thanks for being here today, Simon. Karen is a mother, a small business owner, and somebody who has an extraordinary story of growing up under Oranga Tamariki. She knows the reality of it. She's determined to reform it, and she's already making an impact, asking the questions everyone else in Wellington is too afraid to mention. Now, I'm just going to say, this is literally standing room only. We've asked them to bring in a couple more rows of chairs. This is a good problem to have in some ways, but I'm sorry for people who don't have a seat. The way we do this is we make it 1 hour. That's basically the deal. We don't want to go on and on and on, and people say, yeah, well, it was pretty good for the first 3 hours, and then he just kept on going. So that we will cut it short. And this is fundamentally a listening exercise. You see, everyone who's in any kind of business asks themselves, what business am I in? Well, I'm in the business of representation. We're a representative democracy, and my job is to hear the concerns and aspirations of people up and down New Zealand. This free speech tour is 14 stops, literally from Whangarei to Invercargill, to hear people's concerns and aspirations, and then synthesize them into a narrative that we can implement into policy in Wellington, so the future of this country follows the concerns and the aspirations of the people it belongs to. That's the process we're in. And of course, the representation, oh, here we go, ask and you'll be given. The representation, and people just move around, don't be embarrassed. I'm not going to say, why the hell are you moving? You're moving because there's more chairs coming out. Now, the representation process starts with hearing people. So I'm going to talk probably for about 20 minutes about free speech, why it's important, what it is, what it isn't, why it's under threat from this government right now. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A from the floor and have a good old-fashioned town hall meeting. And I usually start by trying to put these things in a bit of global perspective. You see, I'm 37, incidentally, soon to be 38, so I'm saying it as much as I can right now. And that means I was born in 1983. The first thing I remember seeing on the TV screen was a whole lot of people with hammers and stuff attacking a concrete wall. And sometimes you just kind of know that something's significant. Of course, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know there was a Soviet Union. I didn't know there was a Cold War. I didn't know there was communism or capitalism or nuclear weapons. As a 6-year-old, you don't really know much, to be honest. But I knew that this was significant. And that image is seared on my mind. And I remember my grandfather in his gravelly voice saying, oh, it's pretty good, people uniting. And over the next 20 years, I learned a few more things. And I came to understand what the Berlin Wall was and why it was significant and what had happened. But it was actually a great time for people who have liberal democratic beliefs. Now, when I say liberal, I don't mean the liberal that the Democrats in the United States have used for the last 30 years. I mean a 400-year tradition of growing the rights and freedoms of each person to live their life to the fullest with inherent dignity. That's the liberalism I'm talking about. And it was a good time to be a democratic liberal after the wall came down, because basically we won, the commies lost, and it was all free markets and free minds from here on in. And it was true. You could look around the world and more countries were adopting democracy, more trade, more freedom. It was all going fantastic, gangbusters. For the last 12 or so years since the GFC, our basic freedoms and democratic assumptions have been in retreat around the world. And there's really good data for this. You look at Freedom House, a think tank in the US who measure civil liberties and political rights. There's less democracy out there. And if you don't like data, there's always anecdote. You've got people like Duterte, you've got Bolsonaro, you've got Orban, you've got all these people out there who are more authoritarian than democratic, who don't take democracy very seriously. And it's pretty scary, because as a small nation that relies on a peaceful, rules-based world, we actually want democracy to be advancing and the world becoming more peaceful. Now, I haven't even mentioned President Xi or the CCP or their dominance of China and increasingly China's hinterland in that part of the world. We now live in a time when our basic values are under more pressure than they have been for a couple of generations. And I think that this is incredibly important. It deserves our focus, and it's not getting enough clear focus right now. So that is the starting context to a discussion about free speech, because the question is, what can New Zealand do in this world? Well, we can't bully or force militarily the rest of the world to see things our way, but we can be a beacon of light at the bottom of the earth, showing how civilized people speak freely and talk through their problems with a principle that every kid understands. Incidentally, I must tell you, it's no coincidence that this week and next week, every primary school, every kindergarten, and Parliament are on a 2-week break, all at the same time. It's just the way it happens. But those kids, when they're at school, they know something that seems to be hard for our government to get. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names and words will never hurt me. And we need that principle. We need to be able to talk through our problems as a country and solve them, and actually set a good example to the rest of the world in this environment we find ourselves in. That's New Zealand's gift, to be a beacon of freedom and democracy at the bottom of an increasingly authoritarian world. I think that's something we should aim to do. But the sad reality is that our own government has vastly better marketing, vastly better spin, but actually is no better at solving hard problems with honest conversations than any of those others that I've named. In fact, they may actually be worse, certainly kinder, certainly for the most part better at civil liberties. But do you think they can solve difficult problems? I couldn't believe it today. The Prime Minister of New Zealand told the Cook Islands that they can't open to flights from New Zealand because, wait for it, they're not good enough at testing for COVID. Can you imagine being lectured by the Ardern government about being bad at testing? And I thought, what's she going to do next? Tell them how to build state houses? I mean, you know, it's just unbelievable. But it's not just housing, it's not just child poverty, it's not just building infrastructure, it's not just productivity growth, it's not just crime, it's just about everything they set out to do. I mean, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies this Labor government trying to solve their problems. And so we need to ask ourselves, do we have the ability to have honest conversations and unite New Zealand behind good ideas? I would say right now we don't. And in the context of a world where the authoritarian countries seem to be making all the running, that's a real worry. But enter into that, if that's your sort of starting position, this government is determined to make things worse, because we live in a time when I don't think people have been more concerned about being able to express their views without the fear of the mob, the pile-on, getting cancelled, deplatformed, doxed, which means that they attack you in your place of work for having certain opinions. And you'd hope the role of the New Zealand government at this time would actually be to stand up for free expression. After all, it's affirmed in the Bill of Rights. But they're not doing that, they're doing the opposite. They're making a proposition in the cabinet paper that was released just last week that the government is going to put in the Crimes Act a 3-year penalty, or maximum 3-year penalty, for saying things that are insulting with the intention of stirring up or maintaining hatred. And the problem with that is that it's totally subjective. The cabinet paper the government has put out says there is no definition of hate speech. The Prime Minister was asked, and she said, you know it when you see it. Now, Now, look, I realise she studied communications and not law, but come on. And this is the fundamental problem, is that our freedoms depend on the rule of law. The simple idea that the laws are written down, and that means a number of things. Number one, it means I can plan my future. I can read what the laws are, I can know how to avoid breaking them, and understand what processes and punishments might be in place if I do. And that's really important. I really like that, because it brings me into the conversation. I can understand what my future holds depending on how I behave, because the laws of the land are written down. But the next thing is that even when an experienced RMA lawyer like Kath reads it, it says the same thing as when I read it. Anyone in this room, no matter where you're from, no matter what class or creed or race or disposition, the law says the same thing. And you can call on it to be treated equally to defend yourself if you're accused of a crime. And the simple example I like to use is burglary. Burglary is entering a premise illegally with the intention of committing a further crime. If you're accused by the police of burglary, then you can marshal the facts, bring them to your defense, and get yourself acquitted. Did you enter the premise? Yes or no? If you didn't, you can't be convicted. Did you have the legal right to enter the premise? If you did, it's not illegal, you can't be convicted. Did you commit a further crime when you're there? No, there's lots of ways that you can use objective fact to defend yourself against a prosecution. But when it comes to stirring up or maintaining hatred by saying something that's insulting or abusive, well, where's the standard for that? Well, apparently, you know it when you see it. And here's the next problem. Subjectivity does exist in the law. There's what they call a reasonable person test. But there's also political motivations for bringing about prosecutions. And this is where it gets really difficult, because you're going to have people like the Human Rights Commission stirring up the impetus for prosecutions, and they themselves are a highly politicized body. So I guarantee you, no one is ever going to be prosecuted for the stigmatizing, insulting, and offensive term pale male stale. The Human Rights Commission is never going to haul anyone before a court. The police are never going to take a prosecution for that, even though on the face of it, it's insulting, it's sexist, it's racist, it's ageist. I mean, what's not to be offended by? But there'll never be a prosecution for that. The prosecutions will be selective, and the prosecutions will be politicized, and they will amount to the state entering this environment where people are afraid to speak their mind as a bully entering the pylon that people are already scared of. And that is what is wrong with hate speech laws. They're not only subjective, but they're politicized. And here's the next thing. The maximum punishment of 3 years, well, that's more than you get for common assault, for male assaults female, or even assaulting a child. They only get 2 years for that. So next time someone annoys you, don't insult them, punch them. Yeah, actually, because, no, seriously, I mean, now, seriously, that's actually going to have a smaller penalty. I mean, this is the madness that we're up against. Now, I should just say a few other things, because people, like to say, well, okay, sure, but aren't there already restrictions on free speech? Sure there are. You can't incite violence, I can't say, ma'am, kill that guy, because if there's any chance you're likely to do it, and I am actually, relevant to your choice to kill him, then I've incited violence. And that's wrong. And that's been illegal in the Crimes Act since 1961 and the common law for hundreds of years before that. You can't threaten violence. I can't say, ma'am, I'm going to hurt you. That's a threat. Threats of a crime, threats towards a person, those have always been illegal. But notice there are things that are relatively easy to defend yourself against. Did you say something with the effects of causing a person to commit a crime? Well, first of all, did you say it? Did it have that meaning? And did they commit the crime? You can actually defend yourself against that. You can't defend yourself against insulting and stirring up hatred. Totally subjective. So there are restrictions, but they're ones that are time-honoured and that have defences against them. The same as the criminal nuisance, the classic shouting fire in a crowded hotel room like this. Well, someone does that and there's no fire and there's a stampede and someone gets killed, you're a criminal nuisance. So there are restrictions on speech. So when people say free speech is just saying whatever you want anytime and there's no rules and it's the Wild West out there, actually there are restrictions on speech. And they're well tested, they've been in the law for a long time. And then the next thing is some people think that free speech is the right to use other people's property. Well, no, it's not. I sometimes ban idiots from my Facebook page because I'm allowed to, because actually it's taken me 7 years to build up 50,000 followers on Facebook. And if some idiot thinks that they can come and free ride and tailgate on that and use my page to get their idiotic views across, well, no, they can't. I'm going to ban them. And it's the same thing with your house. It's the same thing with your property. The interesting exception is properties that we all pay taxes on deliberately so that people can be the quote-unquote critic and conscience of society. I'm talking about Massey University. Don't go to Massey. I mean, this is a place that is supposed to be a place of debate, and they've actually managed to restrict people and ban people that they don't like speaking there. I think that kind of censorship's wrong, but generally, my house, my rules, and everyone can apply that standard. Then there's people that say, people have to listen to me. No, they don't. Don't get sucked into that straw man. You don't want to be saying that free speech is the right for people to listen to you. Actually, it's not. And finally, they say free speech, people have to agree with me. No, they don't. One of the consequences of saying silly things is maybe no one agrees with you. So these are some of the restrictions on free speech that we already accept. And I think it's important, if you're going to have this argument, that you've got a clear definition and understanding of what you're talking about. You don't want to end up arguing for a more expansive definition than you need to, and allowing opponents who want hate speech laws to shoot you down unnecessarily. And finally, people might ask, well, why does any of this matter? Who cares? Well, I think there's three reasons. One is that to be human is to have your own thoughts and feelings and to be able to express them. Out of interest, how many people here are cat people? Yeah, okay. How many people here are dog people? Okay, I'm doing this survey nationwide. It's about right. Okay, so here's the thing. Has anybody's dog or cat ever had an idea that is profound and original and different from every other dog or cat? I mean, they're just, oh, okay, sure. Well, ma'am, okay. It's okay, ma'am. No one's judging you. But seriously, part of the human condition is having our own ideas and being able to express them. And I thought someone really summed up the current state to me really well a couple of weeks ago. She said, this is supposed to be an age of enlightenment, but you have to walk on eggshells with everything you say. That's how so many people feel. And I think that that is toxic to our culture. But here's the next thing. I think it's important not only that we can express ourselves at an individual level, it's part of our humanity. I think it's important that we're able to talk through our problems as a country. For my money, one of New Zealand's greatest achievements is Kate Shepherd's universal suffrage. I think that is one of the things where New Zealand really led the world and showed why we're a special country. But her views were unpopular at the time. Her ability to debate and advance them was extraordinary. Sadly, never sat in our parliament, but one of the best orators New Zealand's ever produced. It's worth, if you get a chance, there's some books of her speeches that are worth reading. She was an extraordinary orator. She used free speech to advance that cause. And I think that we should have that as part of our heritage and be very proud of it. And as we face all of these challenges around the world, there are a number of issues that I think we need to be able to work through. One of them is very, very complex. How do we work through our relationship with China? 27% of exports going to one market that's controlled by a military dictatorship that's currently effectively, it is carrying out a genocide and has imperialist ambitions in its hinterland. That requires much better debate than the Ngāi going out and giving speeches about taniwhas and dragons and avoiding all the tough issues. I just think she's got to bring a greater level of seriousness to that. But then here's another one. What does the Treaty of Waitangi mean? Because some people will tell you that it means there is a partnership between two collectives, and your rights as a person depend on which collective you're a member of. I think that's nuts. This is what the Court of Appeal produced in 1987, and it's grown ever since. I think the idea that your membership of a collective is more important than your inherent dignity as a person is one of the most dangerous ideas in history. On the other hand, the rights of every person to flourish in self-chosen ways, so long as they don't harm others, is one of the most powerful and liberating ideas that we've ever had in human history. And because the other reading of the treaty is to go and read what it says, specifically to read what Professor Sir Hugh Kawhito's translation of the Maori text into modern English says. And I think that's the right way to do it. Everyone says, read the indigenous text, okay. Well, what it says is that your taonga is safe. In other words, respect each other's property, and that every person has the same rights and duties. What a fantastic start to a country. Your property's safe, respect other people's property, and everybody's equal. That's probably, and it was a voluntary agreement. It's probably the best founding of a country in history. Why have we gone to such lengths to pervert it and distort it and make it a collectivist doctrine that actually suppresses people's individual rights? I think that's nuts. But I would couch the treaty debate, not the way some people would like to, as Maori versus Pākehā and colonisation and oppression. I would ask, looking forward, what is the best way for New Zealanders to flourish? And it's got to be universal human rights for every New Zealander to flourish in self-chosen ways, not which collective am I a part of, oh, now I know what my rights are. There's two big debates that New Zealand needs to have, and then there's productivity and why do we have child poverty and why do so many kids get $250,000 worth of education spend and come out functionally illiterate and innumerate, and why do we have 400,000 people on benefits and yet there's people from the Pacific Islands desperate to come here to earn money to send back to their homes, and we don't let them in. I mean, there's infinite debates that we need to have that we're just not having. That's the second reason. But the third reason is actually one that should appeal to the left and the right. It's that scientific progress depends on the ability to speak freely, because science is fundamentally about seeing things and saying things, formulating a hypothesis, doing an experiment, observing the data, reporting it, seeing if your hypothesis, the drill. This is what Galileo was basically trying to do. He was seeing things and saying things, and the church at the time said, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest and died. There's always been a conflict between free scientific inquiry and freedom of and suppression of free speech. Now, here's a term, I'm just curious, part of my nationwide survey. How many people have heard the term chest feeding? Yeah, cheers, quite a few people. Australian National University issued guidelines saying that you had to describe feeding an infant from your body as chest feeding. Now, the reason for this, and it did have good intentions, is that people who are trans, they didn't want to feel left out. And I think we should have some sympathy for people who feel that way. I think there's, it's a more complex debate than some people allow it to be. But one thing that I'm absolutely certain about is that breasts are real things. They exist. And I know it sounds crazy to be saying it, but this is actually the stage we're at, where a serious university like ANU is trying to say that feeding of infants can occur without breasts. I mean, there's so much evidence that breasts are real. You may have some of your own. You may know that we and similar animals are called mammals. You know why that is? Because we have mammary glands that turn sugars into lactose, which is what infants, mammalian infants, like to consume. They're evolved to consume it, or they're created to consume it, if that's what you believe. I don't mind. This is actually pretty simple stuff. But when you've got a university that is seriously saying they want to prohibit people from saying breasts exist, what the hell chance do you have of making any kind of scientific progress anywhere? And this is my favorite example of the insanity that we are facing. Now, I'd just like to point out, I told the story in Napier last night, and some smartass in the front row said, well, actually, sir, some breasts aren't real. But anyway, what can you do? Napier, Tauranga, you guys are much more civilized, I've got to say. Anyway, there you go. I think it's important that we're able to express ourselves as humans. I think it's important we're able to work through difficult issues as a society. And I think it's important for scientific progress that we're able to speak freely. And, you know, trying to suppress people from speaking freely damages all of those causes. The rule of law is so important as a bulwark for our freedoms because it allows us to read the same law as anyone else, protect ourselves from discrimination by the state. It's critical. And there's one final reason why freedom of speech matters, because freedom of speech is the keystone freedom that protects every other freedom, and people get it intuitively. I say to the CCP, you know, if you guys are so confident you're doing such a great job, why don't you just stop censoring the internet and let people tell them about it? You know, they'll never do it. They can't afford to. No tyrannous regime can afford to allow free speech, and no free society can allow tyrants to suppress free speech. It is the dividing line between free societies and unfree societies, and that's why it's worth defending, and that's why we need to show this government the error of their ways, thinking that they can put in a nice little law that will get rid of some of the nastiness in the world. Well, it won't. It will be abused, it will suppress freedom, and it will actually stop the conversations that deal to the true nastiness. And I finally finish just by making the point that I think we all need to make an effort in our time on Earth, and this will sound like something you hear from someone else, to actually be nicer and more respectful and treat people with more dignity. I mean, I try, but I'm a parliamentarian. Oh, you're right. But and you know, the difficulty is that if people are going to be nasty to each other, it just increases the demand for this kind of restriction. And I think that we should oppose it, but it's easier if we have some sympathy for the fact that a lot of people do get a lot of abuse, a lot of nastiness, and we should be trying to stop that. We shouldn't be trying to abuse free speech. People that do that are harming the cause, and the real cause is actually a higher level of civilization and conversation to solve our problems. That is the real takeout. The problem is that state censorship just ain't going to get us there and improve anything. So that's my ending, and it's a great time. We always say goodbye because we don't have mics for the thing yet. So we'll see you guys on Facebook. Goodbye. Thank you for being here in Tauranga tonight, and we hope that